After Nolan's Batman was an absolute hit, DC had everything it needed to crush it with a shared universe, using the world's most famous superheroes. But then Batman v Superman split the fan base, Zack Snyder got fired, the theatrical cut of Justice League flopped, and the DCU went down the drain. It looked like DC movies were doomed, and that they'd never be able to compete with the MCU. But then a guy Marvel had fired managed to turn things around. He had to make some pretty controversial calls that made a lot of fans hate him, but in the end, he pulled it off. He saved the DCU and brought DC back to the top, beating Marvel for the first time in 17 years. Today, we're going to check out how James Gunn saved DC and gave this universe a fresh new start. It all started back in 2018, when DC was in the worst shape possible. After all the drama around Justice League, the shared universe collapsed. The fan base was split in two, casual viewers turned their backs on Warner, and several actors like Ben Affleck and Ray Fisher said they weren't coming back. To make things worse for them, Marvel was raking in all the cash with Infinity War, and it looked like Endgame was gonna make even more money, taking over the superhero movie world for good. But then, some quite tasteless tweets from James Gunn started blowing up on social media, and in a rushed move to dodge the bad press, Disney's execs fired the guy. That left the Guardians saga incomplete, since Gunn was supposed to direct the third and final movie. It also hit Kevin Feige hard, since James was basically his right-hand man. He was in charge of the cosmic storyline in the MCU. According to Gunn, he came up with the whole Infinity Stones plot in 5 minutes, and Feige loved the idea. That ended up becoming a huge part of the whole Infinity Saga.
Didn't know that.
Hey.
Toby Emmerich, one of Warner's execs, saw an opportunity and swooped in to snatch up Gunn. He offered him a Superman movie to relaunch the franchise. But Gunn felt like that was too much pressure, because the Superman situation was too messy. At that time, no one knew if Cavill was still going to be Superman, or if Warner was planning to recast him. It also wasn't clear what the long-term plan was for the whole universe, since there was still a tiny little chance Snyder might come back, to finish his version of Justice League. Knowing he'd be walking into a huge controversy for no reason, Gunn chose to go with something less intense that didn't decide the future of the entire universe. So he made a sequel to the Suicide Squad. It was a weird move, since the group was in a terrible spot after the 2016 film. But Gunn believed he could make a bunch of misfits likable, since he'd already done it with the Guardians. His goal wasn't to revive the whole universe, just to get people to enjoy a DC movie again, which was already a big deal. Plus, he had to clean up the image of those characters, and bring the Suicide Squad brand back to life after it had been buried by the previous film. During production, Marvel brought Gunn back for Guardians 3, but by then, he was already locked in with DC, and that decision would go on to change superhero movies for good. Because of the pandemic, we had to wait until 2021 to see Gunn's movie, which ended up being really well received. It got better reviews from both critics and fans than the previous version. The action scenes were awesome, it fully embraced the wild comic book vibe, and it even had a few tearjerker moments. This movie let Gunn pull off some of the same tricks he used in Guardians, like talking animals, dudes with daddy issues, and retro music montages. But since Warner gave him total creative freedom, he went way further than he ever could have under Disney. He killed off major characters, made edgy jokes, and packed the screen with tons of violence. But sadly for Gunn, the movie bombed at the box office. It only made $168 million on a budget of $185 million, making it one of the biggest flops in DC's entire history. Of course, that wasn't really about the quality of the film. People weren't going to theaters because of the pandemic. A lot of cinemas were still shut down around the world, and Warner had the genius idea to do a simultaneous release in theaters and on HBO. That already tanked the box office for Tenet and the Wonder Woman sequel, and surprise, surprise, it hit the Suicide Squad hard too. After that financial flop, it looked like Gunn's time at DC might be over fast, but Warner knew they didn't need to make back the money right away. They'd already been losing money for years because audiences had checked out, but now they finally had a director who could connect with fans, casual viewers, and critics too. What they needed was for people to fall in love with DC characters again and fix the brand's image. That was something Gunn had already proven he could do, so they gave him another shot. But instead of jumping into something huge, like a Superman or Batman movie, Gunn chose to make a spin-off of The Suicide Squad starring Peacemaker.
What?
Initially, Gunn wanted to kill off Chris at the end of the movie, but John Cena surprised him with how good he was at dramatic acting. So Gunn decided to keep the character alive, and started writing a spin-off series before the movie even hit theaters. After people ended up liking the Suicide Squad, Warner gave the green light to the project, but everyone except the execs thought it was going to be an even bigger flop than the movie. While Marvel was making shows starring Wanda and Loki, characters people already loved and had seen plenty of times on the big screen, Gunn decided to tell a solo story about a character people hated and had only just just met like 5 minutes ago. Best case scenario, people would think he was just a cheap knockoff of the Punisher. Worst case, no one would even bother watching the show. But Gunn ended up shocking everyone with a series that was even more irreverent than the movie, had the HBO Max quality stamp, and gave the character a ton of depth. In just a few episodes, he managed to humanize Peacemaker and make us actually feel for him and his childhood trauma. What seemed like the biggest mistake of Gunn's career turned into a total win. Sure, Peacemaker didn't break any viewership records at the start, and it got beat by Miss Marvel. But word of mouth was so strong that the season finale had 44% more viewers than the premiere. Peacemaker wasn't a joke anymore.
Peacemaker. What a joke.
Gunn showed that he could make people fall in love with even the most unlikable character out there. He didn't stick to the MCU's family-friendly tone, and he didn't go full dark like the Snyderverse either. Plus, he raised the bar for DC's TV projects. I know a bunch of people really liked the Arrowverse shows back in the day, but let's be real, those shows were full of filler, had super low budgets, and felt more like soap operas than superhero adventures, mostly because they were made by CW. Peacemaker proved that DC shows made for HBO Max could be just as good as the movies, and that they could pull in big ratings too, which meant they could also have way bigger budgets. Without Peacemaker, we never would have gotten the Penguin. In April 2022, the merger between Warner and Discovery was finalized, which put David Zaslav in charge as CEO of the company. This move was a big deal because Zaslav kicked off a major restructuring. He created DC Studios as a brand new, unified division, with James Gunn and Peter Safran as co-chairmen and CEOs. Gunn had already proven himself as a talented creative, and Safran had been a producer at Warner for years, so both were trusted. This gave them a single, shared creative and strategic vision for all DC movies, shows, and video games, something that had never been done before. Zaslav understood that they couldn't repeat Marvel's mistakes, especially since Kevin Feige is always drowning in work. That's why Gunn's role is more about being the creative force, while Safran takes care of the complicated business side of things.
I've learned.
This was a solid step in the right direction, but there were still tons of questions, like what was going to happen with the Snyderverse, what they'd do with the already cast actors, or when we'd finally see Superman again. To make things worse, while DC Studios was still getting off the ground, The Rock used that power vacuum to convince Zaslav to bring back Cavill and squeeze him into a cameo in Black Adam. His plan was to gain influence and eventually take Gunn and Safran's spot as head of DC Studios. If he could get Zaslav to greenlight a Black Adam vs. Superman movie, he'd become one of the DCU's key players, and it would be nearly impossible to push him out. It wasn't until July 2025 that Gunn finally explained how that whole move threw him off, because he had already decided to reboot the entire DC universe with a brand new cast. He knew Cavill wasn't going to be part of it, and he never approved the actor's post announcing his return. To make things as clear as possible, Gunn and Safran sat down with Cavill and explained the plan for the new universe. They let him make a new post saying he wouldn't be coming back as Superman, despite what The Rock had made him promise, and they made sure The Rock never got near DC again. This was the trickiest moment in Gunn's entire career at DC. A big chunk of the fandom turned against him and threw insults in every language imaginable because everyone wanted Cavill back. It had taken Gunn 2 years to build a solid relationship with the audience, and all of that could have gone down the drain in 5 minutes because of a cameo he never even approved.
That's a shame.
Then, Gunn announced that he was going to write and direct a new Superman movie called Superman Legacy. This film would have a brand new cast, a new story, and take place in a new universe completely separate from the Snyderverse. Normally, most people would have been cool with this just to see more of Superman, but The Rock's move messed everything up. Seeing that his relationship with the fans could be ruined forever, Gunn uploaded a video just a month later, in January 2023, explaining everything, or well, almost everything. He cleared up that the new universe would follow an interconnected story divided into chapters. Kind of like Marvel's sagas. This was part of a 10-year plan approved by Zaslav, and it would mix big-name heroes like Superman and Batman with lesser-known ones like the Creature Commandos and the Authority. Gunn explained that the universe would be built around smaller stories that don't all have to be watched to get the big picture. Once again, Warner learned from the MCU's mistakes because none of DC Studios' projects feel like homework. Also, in this video, Gunn didn't promise any big crossovers or events just to try and catch up with the MCU. Like what happened back when Warner rushed into Batman v Superman. Just like with the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, Gunn's main goal was to tell good stories that people would enjoy, and that's it.
Good plan.
But Gunn also had to deal with the Batman and Joker situation, which weren't part of the main continuity. Remember, by 2023, Warner had already announced the Batman 2, the Penguin, and Joker 2. Some conspiracy theorists were hoping Gunn would merge all these universes into one big storyline. But seeing how successful both franchises had been, he decided to launch the Elseworlds label. This new banner is a streamlined way to label stories that take place outside the main DCU canon. Of course, since Joker 2 flopped in 2024, that franchise faded into oblivion. And ever since 2023, people have been asking for Pattinson to be the DCU's Batman. But this new label makes room for fresh, different, and creative stories that aren't tied down by the main timeline. It's perfect for giving talented creators more freedom. We'll probably see adaptations of Kingdom Come, Red Son, or Dark Knight Returns under this label, but we're gonna have to wait for those. Any other CEO would have just trashed all those franchises to tell their own version of the story, like Feige first tried to do with the Netflix shows. But Gunn got that what Matt Reeves had done was good enough to keep, even if DC Studios had to deal with having two live-action Batmen at the same time. But the most important part of this announcement was how Gunn planned to work. Since he's the one reviewing every project, if he doesn't approve something, it doesn't move forward, because he puts quality over quantity. Gunn said multiple times that he's had to cancel projects because the scripts weren't good enough, and he wouldn't even greenlight casting until the script was locked in. That might sound like the most basic thing ever, but it's the opposite of what Marvel's been doing in recent years. Instead of trying to fix weak scripts during post-production, Gunn wants to make sure every project is solid from the very beginning. But not everything was good news. After this video, it still wasn't clear what was going to happen with Peacemaker and the Suicide Squad, since the last episode of Peacemaker had a cameo from the Justice League of the old universe, and part of the fandom lost interest in Shazam 2, Aquaman 2, The Flash, and Blue Beetle because it felt like those movies were stuck in limbo. Even though Gunn promoted them and spoke positively about them, a lot of people accused the new CEO of dooming those projects by announcing the reboot too early. To be fair, previous DC movies had already flopped at the box office, like Birds of Prey and Wonder Woman 2. The reboot announcement probably didn't help the other films, but Gunn chose to focus on clearing things up and promoting the new Superman movie, which had already been announced. And even though that strategy was super risky, it ended up working. They made us wait until December 2024 to get our first real taste of the new universe with the release of Creature Commandos, written by Gunn himself. For the third time, it was a project full of unknown characters that nobody really believed in. And it was kinda odd that the very first entry in this new universe was an animated series, instead of a big movie starring a major hero. But once again, Gunn pulled it off. He used his well-known formula and ended up with a critical success, receiving positive reviews for its voice acting, animation, and storytelling. It turned out way better than What If Season 3, which dropped at the same time on Disney+. And it gave us a preview of what was coming in 2025, because DC was finally ready to beat Marvel on all fronts.
I beat you!
But the real trial by fire for Gunn was Superman. If this movie didn't work, he was going to lose the support of both the audience and Zaslav, since he took full responsibility for the project. There'd be no one else to blame if the movie flopped or if people didn't like it. Luckily for Gunn, Superman won over the world. The first teaser became the most watched trailer of the year, and people were talking about the movie for months. Sure, there were doubts about the casting, the number of characters, and even the new suit, but once the movie hit theaters, people loved it. A whole new generation of Superman fans was born. Critics liked it, fans liked it, and it crushed the Fantastic Four both at the box office and online. It became the highest grossing superhero movie of 2025, and even though it didn't make as much money outside the US as Man of Steel, it was a huge hit locally. According to Variety, it's going to bring Warner around $125 million in profit, so it was a win on all fronts and a great start for the new DCU. Gunn's strategy since late 2022 had been super risky, but with Superman's success, he managed to save DC in theaters. Now people are hyped for the Supergirl movie and the upcoming projects because they had such a good time with Superman. The only thing left to sort out was the whole canon situation, a mess Gunn got himself into with that cameo in Peacemaker's season finale. A lot of fans accused him of nepotism and having a huge ego, since he wiped out all the Snyderverse projects except the ones he had written, or where he had picked the cast. It made sense that some people felt betrayed, because Gunn decided to keep Peacemaker but replace Superman. It's likely Gunn was under pressure from Zaslav to make a second season of Peacemaker, because the first one was a hit and one of HBO Max's strongest cards, but no one's gonna admit that out loud. The important thing is that Gunn managed to fix this mess in the smartest way possible. Rather than offering a complex, multiverse-style explanation, or turning the whole season into a non-canon story, he went with a simpler, more practical solution. For the previously on segment in the Peacemaker Season 2 premiere, they reshot the scene, swapping out the shadowy Justice League figures with the Justice Gang. The new version shows Superman, Supergirl, Guy Gardner, Mr. Terrific, and Hawkgirl. It was like the original cameo never happened.
This never happened.
If that wasn't enough, this second season became the highest rated superhero show of all time, with a 99% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. So Gunn basically just saved both DC movies and shows. And to keep the hype going and not let the Superman momentum die down, on September 3rd, he announced Man of Tomorrow, a direct sequel to the first movie. The only details we've got so far are that Clark and Lex are gonna team up to face a bigger threat, probably Brainiac. I wouldn't be surprised if other characters show up too, like Supergirl and the Justice Gang, now playing a bigger role in protecting the whole planet. planet. This one could be an Avengers-level crossover, but Gunn only announced it once people had already fallen in love with all the characters. At the pace the new DCU is going, it's likely to keep outshining Marvel in the short term and take over superhero movies and shows in a couple of years. All thanks to the choices James Gunn made, how fast he gets quality projects done, and keeping the story as the top priority. That's exactly what didn't happen with the old DC universe. And if you want to know how the fall of the old DCU went down, you gotta check out this video.
Have a terrific day.